during the course of the call, please use the facility at the bottom on Zoom, where the chat box, and direct your question either to everyone or to an individual. I've already got some questions that people are sent in today, so that's really good. What I'm hoping is we can get through the short presentations from each of our illustrious panels today in time to have some questions. I think last week we ran out of time. So just a quick update in terms of where we are. We will be obviously recording today because I think quite a few people said they wanted to join but couldn't. But in terms of where we are in the COVID cycle, we're celebrating our 100th day of lockdown. That's an exciting celebration, I guess, and a moment to remember. We've certainly obviously witnessed the success so far of the easing down measures across the UK with the usual approach from the English, honestly, when it comes to fine weather, the opportunities to go on the beaches. And actually, more importantly, obviously, business is beginning to reopen with our own Independence Day on the 4th of July. So we've got lots to, I guess, look forward to, including the opening of the pubs. Les, of course, who live in Leicester. The city, of course, was the first to experience a local lockdown after a rise in corona cases. The government has insisted, obviously, they've been working closely with local partners, but the BMA, the union, obviously, they represent the doctors in the UK, said they felt that ministers needed to be a little bit more transparent about their data. Oddly enough, they should have been on our call. I think, 3 weeks ago when we had Pimento member Redfin, who were showing us their own COVID predicted model, because I'm sure they could have told us that Leicester was going to kick off before the government, but there you go. So today we're going to be talking about retail. I think on the back of our deep dive into the world of travel a couple of weeks back, retail, I guess, is one of the sectors that really has been struggling through this period. It's interesting because obviously prior to going into COVID, it was already under the cosh in many respects, not least of which obviously with the advent and the development of online and the continuation of that and the acceleration of that through COVID with the likes of Amazon and so on. But we've obviously heard this week things have unfolded with one of the largest out-of-town retailers falling into administration, and I'm sure they won't be the first or the last. So it's going to be good to really get a perspective both from retailers themselves, and we've got two of those on today's calls, and a specialist in the whole shopper marketing and retail area in BWP. Quick profile update on our team of our presenters today. Graham Appleyard is a business leader with over 25 years experience leading both brands and commercial teams. He's worked for brands like Diageo, Moet Hennessy. He's worked in London, Dublin, Paris, and today he is the co-owner and business partner with Tasha Gladman, who's also on this call. They set up Flintlock in 2014, and their particular consultancy tends to focus very much on FMCG and retail projects. Not exclusively, but obviously that's an area they've got a huge amount of experience, and they've worked with the likes of Co-op Food Funeralcare, Lipton iced tea, as well as brand repositioning work for Costa, Dulux, Decorator centres, and Co-op insurance and marketing plan development for Hovis, Bailey's, Caffe Nero, Boots and Guinness. And Flintlock have been with Pimento since 2017. We've also got with us today Johnny Morris, recently returned from overseas. He's an international retail CMO who's been working at the leading edge of luxury in particular in businesses with sort of 5 billion turnovers, groups based in the Middle East, Russia and Asia. He's led marketing overseas for brands for ASICS, for The Body Shop, Charlotte Tilbury, Fred Perry, H&M, Harvey Nichols, Jo Malone, MAC, Mothercare, Pizza Express, Starbucks, and many, many more. So he certainly knows his stuff, and he's generally hired to deliver change in through digital transformation, marketing technology, and customer data, all key obviously for retail and all key for marketing in general these days. And he's recently turned to the UK, straight into lockdown with his family over in Henley, and we welcome him on the call. And then by last but by no means least, we have the founder and owner of BWP, who I say are an award-winning specialist retail agency who provide integrated solutions for the development of PR, digital, creative solutions for clients including Waitrose, IKEA, Kodak, Polaroid, Archer, Tristan Capital, Lotus Properties, CBRE, and Land Securities, and many, many more. And Richard Beasley, their founder, who's basically by his own admission grown up in retail, almost the sort of Margaret Thatcher of retail. She used to be above the grocer's shop, and I think very much Richard has spent all of his time in the retail world developing strategies of the evolving retail market, and who better really to describe what's happened over the last 25 years to retail in the UK. He also works not just with the retail brands, but he also works with the property owners behind it. So he has a really interesting perspective of the owners of some of these brands, but equally to the people that basically house them. So we now have 47 participants on this call. It's a good number. Thank you for all joining us. I'm going to start by handing over to Graham. Graham, welcome.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Stephen. I'm going to share a few slides with you. So good morning, everybody. And I hope that you can see that. Probably thumbs up will do. But I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes or so, as Stephen said, just talking to you about the future of retail. I guess the one thing to say, starting this, is that any thoughts on the future are a prediction, and that means that there's there's probably 50% of this that will become a reality. There's probably 50% of it that definitely won't. But I guess the one thing I can say is that what I'm going to share with you over the next few minutes is really based on conversations that we've had with our FMCG and retail clients over the last 3 or 4 months or so. So I'll look at what we've termed really our sort of top 5 recurring themes from those conversations. But I thought I'd just start with almost touching on the perhaps not so surprising. Oh, there we go. A few things here that not necessarily new news to any of you, but let me just touch on them anyway, because they're important to note, and they set the context perhaps for the top 5 themes. The growth in online. Well, there's no shock there, but I think it was termed that the first 5 weeks of lockdown saw what felt like 5 years in terms of the change in shopping behaviour. But was certainly noted by I think it was the CEO of AO who pointed that out. And when you look at May of this year versus May 2019, online shopping was up 130, 140%, so almost 2.5 times. So we've seen a huge increase, and a lot of businesses almost transforming to 100% online overnight, which was a huge challenge to them. The importance of mobile first, again, that has been a theme over a number of years, but it's accelerating. And I think the one thing to say that's perhaps interesting for us on that point is that about 2/3 of the traffic to retail sites is mobile, but only about 50% of the transactions. So there's a gap there, and there's an opportunity for us to close that gap in terms of improving customer experience and driving people through to purchase and to transaction. I've called it the need for collection points, and the reason I put need is, if I'm a retailer right now, delivery is extremely expensive, and if I can do anything to reduce that impact on margins, I will. So collection points work for the retailer, but also, and in some of the work we've done recently with a couple of our retailers, it also works for the customer. It might sound surprising at the moment. We've all been at home for the last 3 or 4 months, so we've been able to receive any delivery. But actually, when you're at work or you're out, it's not always as simple. So it makes it a more flexible solution, and I think we're going to see a lot more curbside pickups, talk about drive-through, and the fashion retailers are even starting now to talk about changing rooms at collection points, because you think about the amount of things that we return, the ability to almost have an immediate return service. Try it on. If it doesn't fit, you can return it immediately. And the final point on there, and I'll touch on this a little bit more in the next few points, but this sense of less browsing, more purpose, certainly in store, and the thought that actually, if I'm going into a city centre, or I'm going to a store, I'm going to be reasonably clear on what I'm looking for, given the challenges and the queues and the social distancing. So a sense of more purpose, and how do you actually drive a bit more interaction. So just wanted to touch on those, but very quickly I'll go through a top 5 as we see them from our themes. The first one is the importance of colleagues and in store. We did a big piece of work about 2 years ago with Co-op, looking at the importance of colleague advocacy, and I guess what's interesting is a lot of those principles still stand today, and just from a statistics perspective, a 1 point improvement in customer engagement drives about a 1.5% improvement in customer satisfaction, but also a similar increase in turnover. So your colleagues are your best advocates. And I think what's interesting as we look to the future is that retailers are going to need to entice shoppers back in and back into store, and colleagues are going to be right at the heart of that. So whether it's the fact that the experience is more personal, it's more interactive, it's more informative, the colleagues will potentially be the difference in that experience. So think about how you look after them and how you treat them, and a lot of that goes down to the basics. And it sounds simple, but it is the fair wages, it is the good facilities. And when I say good facilities, I mean, is there somewhere that I can go and have a cup of coffee, that I actually want to sit down? Are the toilets clean? Anything to ensure that it's the best environment it can be. Listen to your colleagues, communicate with them, have them as engaged as possible. And remember that it's not just about in-store. Thinking about collection points and delivery from earlier, this follows all the way through to the door. And we were talking about this last week, actually, and Tasha was saying that she had a delivery that was made for her son, his a new bike. We always all remember that, the excitement of getting a new bike. But what was really interesting was that the delivery driver had taken a note of what was in his van. He knew what he was delivering, and he made a point of saying, when he was there on the doorstep, I knew I was going to make someone happy today. And I think that follows that almost that brand all the way through to the doorstep. So the importance of colleagues and that the fact that they are an extension of your brand. Selling the user experience, it's not just about the product and the sale. And the more that technology improves, the more that this will accelerate, certainly when you look at it from an online perspective. So if I'm not going to go into a store, if I'm not going to go in there and actually experience that product firsthand, how do you bring it to life for me online? How do you help me? How do you inspire me? How do you help me visualize it? Everything here from the B&Q room visualizer, where I can put in different kitchen designs, different colors, different work surfaces, through to Sephora's virtual artist, where they give you 100 or so different makeup options that you can try on virtually. So there's all sorts of routes into this, but it's actually, how do you bring it to life online? We talked about less browsing, but how do you use that as well online to drive browsing around the site? But keep it simple. Don't lose the original purpose for that individual coming to the site. And I think finally, just recognizing the opportunity for user-generated content. If you're going to bring that the usage to life, we were looking through some of the grocery retailers recently. If you look at a Sainsbury's or a Waitrose, you get a real sense that they're engaging their customers that much more, perhaps versus a Tesco, which is a more functional design on site. And then diving into the world of beauty, take a pure play like Beauty Pie and compare that to Boots, and you get a real sense of actually what's possible and how it's brought to life for the users themselves. So think about the user experience versus just the product. Signing up the subscribers. It's not new, but how do you lock in consumers for the long term? I'm going to talk a little bit more about razor blades in a moment, but that's where perhaps a lot of this started. But actually, if we think about the amount of products that we buy on a regular basis, that are actually often the same brand, and very often a regular time frame. So you could look down a list of detergents, razor blades, toothpaste, vitamins, coffee pods, tea bags. I mean, the list is pretty endless. It goes on. You take Smol there. It's an example. Some of you may have come across it. It was set up a couple of years ago by a couple of ex-Unilever marketeers. But it's the same concept. It's laundry detergent capsules, dishwasher tablets. It's easy, it's simple, it's hassle-free. The product is very good. But you're potentially tied in for years to come because you just don't have to think about it. And as I say there, we're a pretty predictable bunch. So the FMCG, some of the FMCG businesses are starting to do this. There are also, interesting enough, though, retailers that are now looking at this too. So Holland and Barrett as an example. Simple concept. It's not just your essentials, it's your favorites as well. And they're asking you to pick your favorites, tell us how often you want them, and subscribe. And they call it the subscription box. You can change it as often as you like, but really it means they're tying you in on a regular basis. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that, certainly for the basics, the essentials, and those regular purchases, but tying people in and consumers in for the long term, driving loyalty. Sourcing local and seasonal, and there had been perhaps a rebirth in this a little bit prior to the lockdown, but actually as we look forward, most of us have been pretty close to home. We haven't ventured very far afield over the last 3 or 4 months. Perhaps the local store, perhaps the local high street, and sadly, it doesn't look as though we're necessarily going to go that far afield in the months to come. Although there has been I guess last weekend there was a spate in summer holiday bookings, but for most people, local is going to be important. Now, local can mean a number of different things. It could mean at one level, British. 100% British meat that the Co-op sign up to. It could be your local store and your local brewery, but those two, but they all play to a local economy specifically. So there's a I guess a feeling that the businesses are looking to, that the consumers are looking to invest back in their local economy. But there's also this sense, when I think about the reduction in travel over the last few months, that people are almost being forced to recognise the impact that they've had on the environment. So this feel of caring for the environment. I think we've seen a bit more nature, a lot less airplanes in the sky, a few more birds, and the seasons have changed around us. We've gone from kind of you might say we've probably gone from winter through spring, summer. It feels like we're back into autumn already, but the belief in seasonal and the opportunity to eat seasonal. So the more that we've been at home over the last 3 or 4 months, there's been a lot more eating in, a lot less going out. That's not going to change dramatically, even though we might there might be an opportunity this Saturday to start getting out and about a little more. The fact is, with social distancing, with the challenges on financials, there's still going to be a lot less eating out, and that may give rise to the opportunity for eating better quality, locally sourced, seasonal produce. So I think a key point there in terms of social, local and seasonal. And finally, one not perhaps for the as appealing to the retailers, but we've got to be aware of this, direct to consumer. And certainly the FMCG brands that are doing this. I said I'd touch on razors towards the end of this again, but the Dollar Shave Club and Harry's have done a fabulous job over the last few years. And as someone who signed up for about 25 years to a best a man can get, I've been particularly impressed with Harry's over the last year or so, and it links back into that thought around subscriptions as well. But that is standard practice, you might argue, for a lot of the new to market brands. But there's it's certainly more challenging for the established. And I thought it was worth just raising Heinz's foray into Heinz to Home, which was launched in April. No sooner than they'd launched it were they fending off a lot of challenges from retailers as to why they were doing it and how that might affect their relationship with the retailers. Their line was that it was predominantly for frontline workers, but I think it's worth well, I think they said that because that they had to open it up to all because they couldn't specifically target frontline workers. It'll be interesting to see where that one goes, because it's tough for the more established brands to try and do that. But I think the point I just want to make on this is that it's going to be crucial for all these brands, if you don't get a chance to see it, to feel it, to experience it in store or in a retail environment, is how they bring these brands to life, how they get really clear on why they exist, how they do business. And we've certainly spent a lot of time with brands over the last 3 or 4 months, actually, developing and sharpening their brand propositions just to have them set up to be able to do this going forwards. So I guess really just a few thoughts there. Our kind of top 5 themes. Some of those will become more prevalent. Some of them will certainly recede as we fall back into old habits. But I hope what that's done is giving you something just to think about over the next few months. I'm here to the end of the session. Very happy to take any questions at the end or follow-ups post this session. But in the meantime, to keep us moving, I'm going to pass over to Johnny and stop sharing this one. So thank you very much. Anyway, Johnny, over to you.
So Johnny, so we now get much more of an international perspective on whether those themes are happening around the world from Johnny.
Okay, thanks, Stephen, and good morning, everyone. You can see the screen okay? Quick thumbs up.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm just going to go, I know there are a lot of agency owners on the call, so I just thought I'd look at it from a retail perspective and just look at how our relationship with agencies has changed in the last few months. I thought that would be something that might be relevant for some of you. So just for context, I've just come back from Thailand. I was group marketing director. I looked after 20 different retail businesses. We were trading in 6 different countries. And before that, I was CMO for a business that was looking after 21 shopping malls, 39 department stores, and so on. Some of our brands are in-house, like Lynn, that you can see here. And other brands are franchised, like Fred Perry here from the UK, where we wrapped, you can see this ad I wrapped around a train in Bangkok. So we've got a mixture of brands that we're working with. Just to give you a little intro into sort of how we work with agencies, this here, you should be able to see is our last campaign I just shot, which is Spring Summer 20. And this is for one of our in-house brands. Now, the photographer was from the UK, the creative director, the art director was both from the UK, the stylist from the UK as well. And that one was actually shot on location in the UK as well, which is quite unusual for us. But for an Asian-based brand, you can see how closely we work with UK agencies. This was my project list at the beginning of March. So I was to launch a couple of new brands, launching a new store concept, rebooting one of our brands, launching a pop-up store, going through omni-channel transformation, introducing new technology, and launching in a couple of new countries as well. So that was like at the beginning of March. And here are my agency partners that were helping me deliver that. You can see there was a mixture there of global businesses, a lot of UK, not just because I was involved, but it was legacy of relationships that I'd inherited, but a lot of UK agencies and creative businesses that I was working with on these projects. Now, move forward 2 weeks into the middle of March, and only one of those projects was active. The rest of them were all on hold or cancelled till further notice. And a couple of weeks beyond there, all of our stores were closed, all staff sent home. I came back to the UK to stay with my family because the airports were going to be closed. And we kind of thought, we got on a call and we thought, well, what should we do? Obvious thing we should start doing is just to have free delivery, all brands from our stores. However people want to receive our goods at home, we will deliver them by whichever means we can. And so that was our first step. And then we started that journey that Graham was talking about earlier with social commerce. And we started pushing delivery from Instagram through messaging. We went on to Line, which is this Japanese social network as well. And what Line did for us is they actually put commerce on there, so we could actually shop within a messenger feed. So you can see there me chatting about a pair of shoes, and they start showing graphics and then links, and then I can order within the chat online. And we got to the point that we thought, hey, this is working so well, let's just start directing all of our customers from Instagram through to Line, where we can actually start trading. And then that changed our relationship with Instagram and with Facebook as well, which I'll come to. So what you end up with is you end up with people that are actually in the stores with these social, the social network apps, and customers could chat to the staff in the stores, even though the stores were closed, and they could chat and shop, as it says here. But at the same time, we started designing these rich menus to serve product within our chat with customers. So they might start asking us about when our stores are going to open, but they could actually see these sort of hot links that would take them straight to a product that they could buy through social networks as well. So those were real enablers for us. In Vietnam, we saw the same sales as a normal store, just through social commerce. Other countries, we saw sort of 10 to 15% of our total normal sales immediately started coming through social commerce. And what really changed by April is that instead of those projects that I showed you before, the sorts of things we were working on were much simpler, much more immediate. So instead of omni-channel, we started offering free delivery, as I mentioned. We opened up a temporary warehouse and started selling our own brands direct to consumer from the warehouse. We looked at new packaging solutions that brought all of our brands together, so that we could save time and cost as well. And then we worked with various different fulfillment partners for same-day delivery and things like that. Instead of the enterprise e-commerce, there was all of this social commerce happening. And at the same time, we started shopping on Instagram, making that available. And Facebook Messenger became a very, very powerful shopping channel for us. And then Facebook let us get involved in a beta where actually customers could make credit card payments over Facebook Messenger challenge as well. And then instead of launching stores and brands, marketplaces were hugely powerful for us. So we launched on marketplaces like Lazada in Thailand and Singapore, Myntra in India, started working on a big marketplace project in China as well, just as another way to reach customers online without having to invest in our own expensive either local stores or expensive e-commerce infrastructure. And then all of the technology programs were put on hold. So we started looking at other things like how can we partner with other brands? How can we work with loyalty programs and that sort of thing? So we were still commissioning work. There were still things that were happening. I was doing that from here in the UK, but typically working with different agencies to the ones that we normally work with. So, so really, I guess this is my take on where I think the relationship will go between retailers and their agencies. All the normal disclaimers apply, of course, about how I may be completely wrong. So influencers is something that is just carrying on and continuing for us retailers. It's something that's so simple for us. It's so easy. It's original content. It's a fast turnaround. We don't have those normal brand guidelines that we need to be careful with. They tend to come with their own audience as well. And the results are instantly measurable. And what you can see on the right-hand side is the engagement rates between some of my posts from a brand perspective and third-party posts from influencers that we've just put on our own channels. So there are 3 there in our top performing, much cheaper than generating our own content. And so I can see much, much more of that continuing. This is the sort of thing that I've been looking at, which I like as well, which is kind of a step beyond influencers. So this is a proposal that came to me with an influencer hosting a show, and there's a whole series of these shows, and how did we want to get involved? They would shoot, they would provide the content, we would just give the product and a little bit of guidance on how to wear that product, and they would put all of the rest of the stuff together. Here's another one step above that, Supermodel Me, a program series that was being broadcast across Asia. How do we want to get involved? What do we want to do in terms of sponsoring an episode? Do we want to dress the presenters or something like that? Lots and lots of different options that then start going into content. So that was something else that I've looked at as well. These are the marketplaces, very quick enablers to bringing new sales to retailers. I haven't mentioned the obvious Amazon one on there or shown it, but there are some of the other ones. Very, very quick way for us to work with a local partner to enable sales in a new market. So what are we going to buy now? I think in summary, I think what retailers are doing are buying outcomes, not services. So someone coming to me to sell web services or creative solutions or something like that, just not really going to have any impact. But if they can think of what that outcome is and pitch that outcome to me, that's something that I'm more likely to respond to, like some of the recent examples I showed you with the yacht show, the Supermodel Me as well. We've got to think of agencies as enablers. That's something that's very, very important. That's where I'm looking. So if I'm looking at a partner, I'm thinking about them as enabling a new channel with me. So that might be from a comms perspective or a trading channel. I might think of them as introducing new customers that I don't have, or generating some unique content that perhaps is not something that's so carefully curated by me, but might be quite useful. And some of the other things, we need some tools rapidly to help us. Some Marcoms tools are always quite useful, but I'm being offered quite a few. If you're not offering a free trial, if you're not offering immediate installation, then this is something that other people are doing. And so there are quite a few companies that have lost out because there's a discovery phase that they charge a large fee for, when everyone else is just offering free trial as proof of concept. Think of the smaller steps we can take, then we'll probably remain with you for those big enterprise ones. So what can you do to enable us on some of these new channels, and do proof of concept like pop-ups, and then you've got a chance of building a relationship with us for a longer term as well. Globalization, this is key. I've been working and setting up new relationships with new PR agencies, events organizers, content providers, and so on in local countries. So we don't just run everything centrally. And so I've been building up new relationships in new markets with local agencies who would have never have heard of us before we knocked on their door. And I guess this is quite key for everyone as well, that I was in the Middle East looking after 80 brands, looking after all of their digital marketing budget. We had 4,500 stores, or in 21 countries. No one would ever pitch to me. So we had 1,000 Starbucks stores, and we were running the marketing for that. And no agencies would ever pitch to us. They're pitching to Starbucks all the time, but we were spending money. And if we wanted to work with agencies, we'd have to go out and find them, because weeks would go by without anyone pitching to us. So there are some budgets out there that are probably closer to the customer that are worth looking at as well. And I thought this was really interesting. Stephen invited me to my first call, first Pimento call on 2nd of June. And Katie Street from Street Agency was giving advice on new business. And she said, don't say, would you like to buy, but you should be looking more at, would you like to get involved in? And this really resonated with me because this is absolutely 100% what I'm responding to. If you're selling your services right now, there are very few retailers that I think are going to respond. Whereas if you're selling enablement of a new channel or a new solution or a way of reaching customers, that's something we would like to get involved in. So thank you very much. That's my take. I think I'm now handing over to Richard.
Thank you, Johnny. That was very insightful. What's quite interesting, Ed, is some of the techniques that are being used overseas, and particularly obviously in the field of digital, and some of the experiences you've had and how different they are, I would suggest, to what's happening in the UK. But I'm out to be put right by Mr. Beasley.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning. I am fed up with presentations. I am fed up with Zoom. I now rebranded it Doom, so hopefully I will keep this short and sharp with some observations. We are quite an unusual agency in as far that we work with landlords and fund managers who own numerous shopping centres and retail developments across Europe, across the Far East, and also into the States. We also work with a number of what I will call healthy retailers, the likes of IKEA and Waitrose, who despite the economic climate still continue to trade relatively well. And then we also have a specialist division that works with distressed assets or assets that are going out of business. So for example, Laura Ashley, we're working with the administrator and the new owner in the States to exit the UK, close the stores and reposition the brand into something that will be a new form, many of which we've heard from both Graham and Johnny, where a brand is going to have to reposition itself and behave very differently. As an agency, we kind of work across four different touch points, and I thought it might be worth just giving you a little bit of insight in what we're seeing, and some of this is obviously the reverse of, in particular, what Johnny said. First of all, with our clients, we are seeing a massive shift to business plan first. Language has changed, particularly in the property world. Clearly, we've just seen the demise of Intu, which is a massive situation for the property world and for retail. What that will do to that industry is it will reposition the pricing of every shopping centre. You will see huge amounts of assets going into administration. You will see a number of operators like Intu that can't survive and will have to behave differently. The biggest one for brands will be they will have to move on to a percentage of turnover rent rather than paying straight fees. What that does for businesses, it gives them a choice point. They either embrace the change and find ways to be flexible and work differently, which I would suggest for all of us on this call is a positive opportunity. There are many brands that are going to need to reposition themselves. They're going to have to behave differently. They're going to have to engage the customer differently. And I think that's an opportunity. Equally, we've had a number of customers who've panicked. They've turned off spend. They've stopped investing in marketing. And we all know the case studies of what that does. But it's very hard to navigate through these times. And for the first time with 25 years of being in this industry, I haven't got any answers. I don't know what we're doing half the time. And I think it's fair to say that, you know, we're all kind of in this together. And I think sometimes being brutally honest and transparent in that will bring out the best of people and the best ideas. With regards to the consumer, we're seeing a lot of shift of change, obviously. My mother has discovered Tesco online, which was a feat in itself, but is equally desperate to go back to a shop. I think the consumer's behaviour, we're already seeing returns back to normal a lot quicker than perhaps the media would allude to us. So this is a positive part. We've reopened some schemes in China, very big shopping centres. Within 3 weeks, the footfall is back to the same as last year. Sales densities per square metre are up on last year, and consumer confidence is running at about 85%. So that's a good thing. Poland, very, very similar story. Germany, a little bit slower. France, worryingly quick. I was in France 2 weeks ago. I sat in a bar, thoroughly enjoying my first pint of beer, free to purchase. Within an hour, left completely depressed, because if that's social distancing and people being responsible, get ready for more Zoom sessions or more doom to come, because we'll be in lockdown as quick as we came out of it. So I think consumer behaviour is going to be very interesting. And as agencies, we're going to have to be a lot sharper to get hold of data quicker. We're going to have to be more agile And I think, as Johnny alluded to, we're going to have to come up with much more meaningful propositions to customers, which are outcome driven. I 100% agree with that. I think it needs to be back to that business plan, much more driven on how are we going to move the needle on occupancy, on sales densities, on customer confidence, as opposed to perhaps older metrics like ATV, etc. Some of these are going to take a secondary level, already are. And some of our retailers are looking at the priorities of what good looks like. And we've got to change some of our language, some of our dialogue, some of our sales pitches accordingly. As an agency, what have we got to do differently? Well, sadly, I moved very quickly in my decision making. I have 50 odd staff in the UK and I have a dozen in Europe. I put some of them on furlough. I don't actually believe in furlough. I think it's been abused. I think furlough should be called the job retention scheme, which is what it's about. I think a lot of people are using furlough for the wrong reasons. They're using it illegally. And I think you're also going to see a lot of retail and leisure brands going bust very quickly once the furlough comfort blanket ends. But as an agency, we looked at how we behave, what we felt our customers would need. We were very honest with our customers. I spent a lot of time in the first 6 weeks talking to our customers, saying, look, I'm nervous, I'm scared, I don't know what to do. That's not normal behavior for what is normally a gobby, arrogant CEO from Slough, to make matters worse. So I kind of got that dialogue going very open and honestly. And yes, I've made some cuts, but only strategically, where I feel that we can better service our customers going forward through freelancers, through collaboration, many of which we work through Pimento, and also looking at how longer term, as agency owners, of which many of you are, we navigate the future. What's been interesting for us, we've had 2 M&A opportunities come to the table, and I think this is something that is going to be quite interesting to watch. How can we work differently? Should we all carry on working in the same way? Clearly not. Does that mean that we keep the same structure, the same ownership, the same organisation? I would think there's an opportunity. Again, if you listen to what Graham and Johnny have said this morning, there are lots of changes in trends, there are lots of changes in behaviour. So why would we behave the same for the next 5 to 10 years? And I totally echo Graham's sentiment. I think, you know, our decision making has been accelerated by 5 years as to what we're doing. So are we considering acquisition and mergers? Yes, we are. Are we considering how we behave differently? Yes, we are. And genuinely, as much as it grieves me with Mr. Morley and Stephen on the call, are we valuing and appreciating collaboration with people like yourselves and Pimento more? Absolutely. And I think we've certainly been a little bit remiss in the past of paddling our own canoe and being very much focused on our own business plan and how we do things, as opposed to learning from each other and being much more collaboratively. And then lastly, I think for retail, the wider economy, I get very passionate and upset and frustrated. I went to the opening of Bicester Village. We've worked for MacArthur Glen across Europe for many years. We've opened every realm scheme. We've worked across numerous sectors. I was at the opening of Bicester on the Monday. It was a complete and utter shambles. I've never seen so many people fighting for product. There was no social distancing. There was no control. And yet that, you know, arguably Value Retail did everything they could. They scanned everybody. That gave everyone a false sense of security that, oh, all of our temperatures are good, so we're all safe. But watching people's behaviour, listening to people, you know, 2 girls, oh, it's lovely this, isn't it? Monday morning, and we're being paid to go shopping. What a result. And I'm sitting there thinking, you'll be made redundant in 6 weeks, because when, not if, this all hits the fan in retail, when you see Laura Ashley and brands like that closing, and we work very, very closely with the big 4, with KPMG, PwC. A lot of our work across the world is about repositioning brands like Giant in Indonesia and Malaysia. We're used to looking at how brands are healthy but need to refine. But the culture in the UK is we're slow to do that, and then we end up with CVAs and we go bust. We have got so many brands on our list, some of which you will know, some of which you would genuinely panic about, some of which sadly will be your clients. So I think we need to be very mindful that this is not an easy period for retail. We have to do things differently. We have to be very cautious as agency owners. what we're selling, how we're selling, when we get paid. But on a positive note, all of the countries that I named earlier, consumers will and do get back to normal a lot quicker. What we need to do as marketeers is make sure the customer experiences are different, make sure the customer experiences are unique. We talk a lot about loyalty. We don't really engage with people. We talk a lot about valuing customer relationships. Do we really as brands? That's the kind of elements and areas that particularly with our retail brands we're working with, and with our shopping centres and our outlet partners across the world, we're just trying to rebuild customer confidence, get people back into stores and give them a real reason not to shop online, but perhaps to consider shopping slightly differently in a more engaging way. So do I think we'll return to the norm quicker than perhaps possibly? What does the new norm look like? Who knows? But one thing's for sure, if we don't act responsibly, we will be facing a lot more Zoom calls and therefore a lot more doom and gloom. And that's just my kind of steer and take from the heart, from the hip. And I don't know if that resonates or makes sense to anyone on this call.
Richard, that's very good. Thank you very much indeed. Very passionate and very insightful. And what's interesting there is the crossover between obviously what the retailers are saying, what you're saying as both a retailer and an agency. One of the things that strikes me, and I guess the first question, is that we've spoken very much about out of town, we've spoken about shopping centres. We haven't really talked a great deal about the high street. Yet, obviously, as Graham pointed out in the last 15 weeks, the high street has become our shopping environment. That's where we've gone. What is happening in the high street, and this one is directed at all three of you. What's likely to happen in the next 12 months? What can we expect? And what's your predictions?
Can I take that one? Because the news this morning from Boris has obviously massively changed what's going to happen on the high street. He's going to take away any planning permission required to convert retail into residential. So that's a huge shift and step change. I totally agree with what the guys said earlier about more local shopping. We've all embraced it. We've all enjoyed it. I live in Henley-on-Thames, so I know exactly, what Johnny will be experiencing with restaurants, embracing, delivering Orwells, those sorts of guys. But the reality is we are quick to go back to what we're used to. Easy parking, much more space. High streets aren't conducive to that. They're not great for COVID flow. And also the model of the retailer, they don't want the space anymore. A lot of the units are either too big, they're too small, they're cumbersome, they're not fit for purpose. The refurbishment costs too much. There's no real driver for footfall because they're not owned by one landlord, they're owned by numerous independents who don't really know what they're doing. So, I'd love to say that there's going to be a comeback for the high street, but from what we see with our experience in property and with the shift of the government announcement today, I wouldn't suggest that that's looking particularly great.
Yeah. Which of course then pushes obviously globalization forward, because most of the brands that you're working with are global in nature. Obviously there are some big national brands too, but the back to the kind of the tenet of the whole conversation today about the nation of shopkeepers. The reality is, if those do turn into resi, if it's easy to get a change of usage, then as you say, it's another nail in the coffin for the high street. Graham, do you have a point of view?
Well,
what can we do?
Well, I was just going to say. I mean, I think I take Rich's point, and I think it's going to be hard yards for the high street. But there's one side of it. If I put my optimistic hat on, I guess, depending on how habits, how quick we are to go back to our old habits or not. But when I think about working from home and I think about travel and I think about moving into the cities, I think there might be a bigger shift in all of this that says, if I'm not going into offices on such a regular basis, am I closer to home? Will I be there on a more regular basis? So will I start to use my local stores and my high street more often? I also wonder in a broader sort of thought in terms of where people are going to want to live as we go forward. And I think this is it's a massive thought around the future of cities and where do people want to live? Do they want to live in smaller towns, smaller environments where they do rely more on their high streets? So that might be a long term, but I think it goes back to the point that Rich has made, and that was really interesting to hear how quickly some countries, and at one level very positive, but amazing how quickly some of these countries have gone back to where they were. Because I think everybody at the moment is thinking, hang on, 12 weeks, 13 weeks, 14 weeks, or 100 days, as you said, Stephen, that's enough to change a lot of our behaviours. So I think I still hold a glimmer of hope that actually there's more opportunity now for the high street than there perhaps was before lockdown. But it's going to be based on a few other much broader thoughts around where people want to live and how they commute or don't commute, I think.
As a build on that, before I ask Johnny the same question, I've been talking to quite a few estate agents recently. My daughter works for Knight Frank and others, and they're seeing a bit of a bubble at the moment as people basically start to deplete the city centres and move their families out of places like London and elsewhere, or find a second home for the second lockdown, which they're also selling properties to, can you believe? And the arguments that they are getting is that they are seeing massive increases in demand, very little availability, prices are fairly stable in the home counties, and the supposition is that may not last beyond the October date, where we're all obviously very fearful there's going to be significant redundancies across the UK, and that will have a knock-on effect on confidence. But for now, it's really busy. To your point, is that people are basically erecting offices in their gardens. They found out actually they can work from home, or if they can work from home but don't want to work within the home, then they're actually finding places that they can actually put up offices, and that seems to be a trend now. Well, that's a middle class trend and an age thing, because the counterpoint of view is we're also seeing, the 20-somethings and the 30-somethings who've been working in not bedsit land, but working in sharing accommodation, terribly frustrated, want to get back to the office, and do want to be in major conurbations. Johnny, can you go back to the high street question? I mean, in the markets you work in, I guess high street isn't really an issue for you because you're primarily talking about out of town, but how does the high street manage and work with those larger operators? What do they do differently there?
I guess, I've been out of the UK for the last 7 years, so all I get in terms of a view of UK retail is my take on brief trips back, and pretty shocked by what I've seen, of course. If you imagine not seeing your high street for 5 years and then coming back, all you see is vape shops and empty stores. But you do see some independence here as well. So that's one of the encouraging signs I've seen, is that there are independent stores in the UK that are starting to open up on high streets and adding some colour, which is quite interesting. Overseas, it's a bit tricky finding for me when we're looking at trying to find high street locations, because most of our trading is in malls. What I would add is that it was quicker for us to expand by looking overseas. So quite often with our own brands, we could get faster growth by opening in a new market rather than trying to grow sales in an additional one. And so for the luxury brands that I've worked with, if they're not getting 30% of their sales from China, then they're doing something wrong. So does that mean they're 30% smaller than they could be? Well, or maybe.
Okay. Yeah, again, and that shows, I guess, the point of difference. Richard, this week we saw the Mayor of London, in his infinite wisdom, decide to basically put the congestion charges up and also to extend it for 7 days, just at the point in time when everyone's actually saying, I don't want to get on public transport. I'm going to drive into town because I actually need to get into London. But what's that going to do for the high street? What's that going to do for Oxford Street if you basically force people not get in their cars yet again? Not obviously driving to London, is it going to force them to work and force them to shop locally?
I think that would apply to anything in London. I mean, Westfield has not had the huge spike that it expected the first day it did. And, I sent some of my staff up 3 or 4 days into opening. It was literally like a ghost town because people don't want to get onto public transport. So I think that's probably not, necessarily exclusive to the high street. I think it's just generally the way that people are moving around. It's not for me to comment on why and when you would put congestion charge up, but it doesn't necessarily feel the right time to be doing it. We should be trying to do everything we can to get people to move around. That said, we're obviously all on this call focused on commercial, challenges and opportunities, but I guess you've got to go back to the NHS and the prioritisation of people's well-being. and health, is it actually responsible? You know, some of my shopping centre clients, I said to them in the early days, it is not responsible for us to market you when you reopen, because it's an incubator. Whether you like it or not, it is. So that's where the high street, if it was healthy before, may have had a fighting chance, or a bigger fighting chance. But the reality is the high street's been on its knees for years. And the way that we all shop, you know, and let's face it, we all drive how retailers behave, not the other way around. You know, we want cheaper product, not longer lasting. So therefore, that's why different brands come into the world. You know, we want disposable, fast access. We don't want long-term sustainability. I'm loving shopping in local butchers and local fruit and veg, and everyone is probably feeling a sense of community, a sense of togetherness, and support the local retailer. But sadly, when people lose their jobs, they won't be able to afford to do that. When people can't move around as freely, you know, somebody's put up on the messaging, you can't park in half of these places. So how do you get to, you know, the local councils charge for parking? You know, there's lots of other issues. And until everybody really gets together to try and find a solution, if there isn't a true unity, then the high street isn't going to succeed. And unfortunately, there aren't principal owners of high streets, and that's the problem. Years ago, they were owned by the council or majority owned by major developers, you know, with the exception of the odd town centre regeneration project. There aren't. But that is where you will see a shift. You will see, we've just done a big scheme in Turin, Resi, Eataly food, flexible working, affordable housing, retail, leisure. That's the way that you might see some regeneration, you know, for retail in town centres, but it will be a very different format to what we're currently looking at. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of money. And there's a lot of developers that will be looking for opportunities at the moment. There's a lot of fund managers who have got no appetite and are pulling out of retail as quick as they can because of the risk.
Well, guys, I want to thank you all, and also for all of our, not just our participants, but also our presenters today. It's really, really great to have you on board. That was probably one of the more robust, more engaged sessions we've had for a while. Really, really enjoyed it. I think we should get back together again in the autumn, in September, on retail, and have a look again when perhaps some of the Brexit negotiations are further down the line, and the implications on that, and actually how that might impact on certainly food supply, for example. So in the meantime, I'd like to thank both Graham, Johnny and Richard. I'll put a recording out of today's session so you can share this with your teams, and also for those that couldn't actually join us today. Really informative, very enlightening, and actually very global in nature. So thank you very much indeed for your time, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. We'll be looking at the automotive category. So until then, have a good week, and speak to you all soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.
Bye.